My brother didn't just get sick. His life was being painted away, one brushstroke at a time, by an artist whose canvas held his very soul. The spreadsheet on my monitor blurred, the numbers swimming together into an incomprehensible gray soup. I pinched the bridge of my nose, a dull headache pulsing behind my eyes. It had been like this for weeks. Sleep was a luxury, and focus was a distant memory. All I could think about was my brother, Leo. Or rather, the hollowed out version of him that now occupied his bed back at our parents' house. One day he was my vibrant, life of the party artist brother. The next, he was just a shell. The light had gone out of his eyes, his conversations reduced to monosyllabic murmurs. Doctors ran every test imaginable: MRIs, EEGs, blood panels that looked like a chemistry final. The diagnosis? A big, fat, expensive question mark. My parents, however, had their own diagnosis. Her name was Alara. She'd moved into the old Miller cottage at the edge of the woods about 6 months ago. Nobody knew much about her, which in our small town was practically a criminal offense. She was reclusive, kept to herself, and the one time I saw her at the general store, she had eyes the color of a stormy sea and a stillness about her that was both beautiful and unsettling. Leo had been fascinated. He'd started taking long walks in the woods near her cottage, his sketchbook filled with drawings of the strange, twisted trees and the wildflowers that grew only on her property. Then he'd met her. He was cagey about the details, but he'd come back from those walks either ecstatic or deeply troubled, with no in-between. And then, about a month ago, the light went out. My parents, steeped in the town's latent superstitions, decided Alara had done something to him, cursed him, siphoned his energy. My logical, modern mind revolted against the idea. I argued with them, pleaded with them to focus on the medical avenues, to stop whispering about witchcraft and dark energy. But their fear and grief had curdled into a dangerous obsession. My dad started spending hours on strange internet forums. My mom bought a pouch of what she called protective herbs from a shady online store. They were descending into a rabbit hole of paranoia, and they were dragging Leo's memory down with them. The last time I'd spoken to them 2 days ago, it had been a full-blown screaming match. My dad had mentioned taking matters into our own hands and finding proof in her cottage. I'd lost it. I told them they were being insane, that they'd get arrested for harassment or breaking and entering, that they were disrespecting Leo by turning his illness into some gothic fantasy. My mother had cried and accused me of not loving my brother enough to see the truth. I'd hung up, my hands shaking with a mixture of anger and a cold, creeping dread. That dread was a constant companion now. It was sitting in my gut as my phone buzzed, shattering the silence of my office. It was Mom. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew with a certainty that terrified me that this wasn't a call to apologize. I clicked accept. Mom, what's wrong? Silence at first, then a ragged, choked sob. It's Leo, she gasped, her voice thin and reedy, stretched to its breaking point. We're at the hospital. You need to come. Now. My blood ran cold. What happened? Was it another seizure? Did the doctors find something? I was already grabbing my keys, my coat, my mind racing through a dozen rational medical possibilities. No, honey, it's not that, she wailed, and the sound was so full of despair it made the hair on my arms stand up. It's the cottage. Alara's cottage. My stomach plummeted. Mom, what did you do? The words came out in a low, dangerous whisper. I stopped in the middle of my office, my keys digging into my palm. We had to know. She cried, her voice cracking. We had to see what she did to him. Your father, he jimmied the back window. We just wanted to look around, find something, anything that would explain. Her explanation devolved into incoherent sobs. I felt a surge of white-hot fury, so intense it made me dizzy. You broke into her house? Are you insane? I told you. Son. My dad's voice cut in, rough and trembling. He must have snatched the phone from her. He never trembled. Listen to me. She wasn't there. The cottage was empty. We went to Leo's old room. He told us she loved his paintings. We thought she might have taken one. My dad, the pragmatist, the man who taught me how to change a tire and balance a checkbook, was talking about a stolen painting like it was a voodoo doll. The world had gone completely mad. And what? I snapped. My patience gone. Did you find it? Are you calling me from a jail cell? No, he said, and his voice dropped so low I could barely hear it. It was a voice I had never heard before, laced with a primal fear that had nothing to do with getting caught by the police. Son, we broke into her cottage. There was a trap. Your brother's in the hospital. I froze, utterly confused. A trap? What are you talking about? How could Leo be in the hospital? He was at home with the caregiver miles away from there. There was a pause on the line, filled with the sterile, distant beeping of a hospital monitor. Then my dad spoke again, his voice a shattered whisper that would haunt my nightmares for the rest of my life. The trap wasn't for us, son. It wasn't a bear trap or an alarm. It was on his old easel, which she had in the middle of the room. A painting was on it, covered by a cloth. The moment I lifted the cloth, something happened. A flash of light, like shimmering heat, and a smell. Like ozone and dead flowers. It wasn't for us. I think it was linked to him. Linked to him? Dad, what the hell are you talking about? That makes no sense. I practically yelled into the phone, slamming my car door shut and fumbling to start the engine. The car roared to life, and I peeled out of the office parking lot, driving on pure adrenaline. I don't know how, son. I just know it's true, he said, his voice ragged with a terrifying conviction. The moment I touched the cloth, the caregiver called. She was screaming. She said Leo had started convulsing right at that exact minute. He'd never had a convulsion like that before. His eyes rolled back and he was arching his back, a sound coming out of him, a sound I never want to hear again. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. This was impossible, a coincidence, a stress-induced episode. It had to be. What was the painting, Dad? What was under the cloth? He was quiet for a long moment, and I heard my mom start weeping again in the background. It was him, Dad finally choked out. It was a portrait of Leo, but it was wrong, horribly wrong. It looked like him, the likeness was perfect, but he was hollow. His skin was gray like ash, and his eyes were just black pits, and the background, it wasn't our woods. It was dark, twisted, with thorny vines wrapping around his arms, his legs, holding him in place. It was a painting of a soul being devoured. A cold sweat slicked my skin. Leo had shown me some of his recent sketches before he got sick. They were darker than his usual work, gnarled trees that looked like grasping hands, shadows that seemed to have faces. He'd been obsessed with the woods around Alara's cottage. I floored the accelerator, the city lights smearing into long streaks of neon. After the flash, my dad continued, his voice barely a whisper, the painting, it changed. The gray on his skin seemed deeper. One of the thorns on the vine had a tiny, bright red tip, like a drop of fresh blood. It wasn't there before. I swear to God it wasn't there before. We panicked. We ran. We got the call and came straight here. We left everything. The painting, the door open. We just ran. I didn't know what to say. My logical brain was screaming that my parents, consumed by grief and esoteric nonsense, had suffered a shared delusion. But the raw, unadulterated terror in my father's voice was real. And Leo was in the hospital, worse than ever before. The drive was a 20-minute blur of traffic lights and blaring horns that I barely registered. I screeched into a spot in the hospital's emergency lot and sprinted through the automatic doors. The air hit me, that familiar antiseptic smell of rubbing alcohol and quiet desperation. I found them huddled on a set of uncomfortable plastic chairs in the ICU waiting area. My mom's face was blotchy and swollen, tear tracks cutting paths through her makeup. My dad looked like he'd aged 20 years. His face was a mask of gray, his eyes wide and haunted. Guilt was a physical cloak draped over their shoulders. "How is he?" I asked, the words catching in my throat. "They won't tell us much," my mom whispered, clutching a crumpled tissue. "They're running tests. Dr. Evans is with him. She said his vitals are unstable, a rapid decline." Just then, a woman in blue scrubs with a tired, grim face approached us. Dr. Evans. "Mr. and Mrs. Gable," she said softly. "Your son is stable for the moment, but I have to be honest, we're baffled." "What do you mean, baffled?" I stepped forward. "What's happening to him?" She looked at me, then back at my parents. "His cellular metabolism is in freefall. It's like something is telling his body to just stop. We're pumping him full of nutrients, electrolytes, everything we can think of, but his system isn't absorbing them. His temperature is dropping, his heart rate is erratic. It's a cascade of systemic failures without any identifiable biological cause. No infection, no toxin we can find, no neurological event on the scans. It's as if his life force is just being drained away. Life force. The doctor, the woman of science, used the words life force. My dad flinched as if he'd been struck. My blood turned to ice. The abstract horror on the phone had just been given a name and a room number. "Can I see him?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Dr. Evans hesitated. He's not responsive, and his appearance may be distressing. "I need to see my brother." She nodded slowly, a deep sadness in her eyes. "All right, room 304. Just be prepared." I left my parents in the waiting room, their silent, shared terror a palpable thing in the air. I walked down the hall, my footsteps echoing in the hushed, sterile corridor. Each step felt heavier than the last. Room 304. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dim, filled with the soft, rhythmic beeping of machines that were fighting a losing battle. Leo was lying in the bed, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, a tangle of wires and tubes connecting him to the blinking monitors. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his breathing was shallow. He looked exactly like the shell he'd been for the past month, only more fragile. I moved closer, my heart aching. My poor brother. What had happened to you? I reached out to touch his hand, to offer some small, useless comfort. His skin was cold, clammy. And then I saw it. On the pale, smooth skin of his forearm, just below the IV line, were a series of faint, dark lines. They weren't veins. They weren't bruises. I leaned in closer, my breath catching in my chest. The lines were delicate, precise, overlapping in a way that was both chaotic and intentional. They looked for all the world like fine, frantic brushstrokes. My mind refused to process what my eyes were seeing. I touched the marks on his arm. They weren't raised, not a scratch or a rash. It was as if someone had tattooed him with gray ink, drawing thorny vines that snaked their way up his arm, disappearing under the sleeve of his hospital gown. They were identical to the vines my dad had described in the painting. I felt a wave of nausea so powerful I had to grip the bedrail to keep from falling. My rational world, the one built on spreadsheets and logic, was fracturing, crumbling into dust at my feet. I pulled out my phone and with a shaking hand took a picture of his arm. Then, on a desperate impulse, I gently lifted the edge of his gown. The marks continued, branching across his chest, thin, dark tendrils creeping over his ribs like a parasitic plant taking root. One of a nurse's aides chose that moment to enter the room to check his IV drip. She gave me a sympathetic look. "It's a strange case of levoreticularis," she said softly, noticing where I was looking. "It's a modeling of the skin. Usually happens when circulation is poor. But I've never seen it present in a pattern like this. It's almost artistic." Artistic. The word hung in the air, grotesque and terrifying. I just nodded dumbly, unable to speak. She finished her work and left, leaving me alone with the beeping machines and the impossible truth blooming on my brother's skin. I stumbled out of the room, my mind a maelstrom of fear and confusion. I found my parents where I'd left them, still locked in their private misery. I knelt in front of my dad. "Dad," I said, my voice low and urgent, "we have to go back." He stared at me, his eyes hollow. "Go back? Where? To the cottage? Son, are you crazy? We can't go back there. We committed a crime, and that thing in there." "I don't care about the crime," I hissed, pulling out my phone and showing him the picture of Leo's arm. "Look at this. Look." He squinted at the screen, and my mother leaned over his shoulder. A collective gasp escaped their lips. My mom pressed a hand to her mouth, a fresh wave of tears spilling down her cheeks. "It's the same," my dad breathed, his face ashen. "The vines. From the painting." "Whatever she did, whatever that trap was, it's connected to that painting," I said, the words feeling insane even as I spoke them. "Dr. Evans said his life force is draining away. The painting is of him being devoured, And now these marks are appearing on his skin. It's not a coincidence. We have to get that painting. A flicker of his old self returned to my dad's eyes, a spark of resolve in the sea of fear. He looked at my mom, who just nodded, her jaw set. Desperation was a powerful motivator. "What's your plan?" he asked. "You two stay here," I said, standing up. "Be with him. If anyone asks, I went to get coffee. I'm going back to that cottage. If she's not there, I'm taking the painting. If she is, I'll deal with it." "It's too dangerous," my mom pleaded. "You don't know what she is." "And I don't care," I said, the lie tasting like acid. I was terrified, but seeing Leo so helpless and fading had ignited a cold rage inside me. "She's hurting my brother. I'm not going to let that happen." I didn't wait for them to argue. I gave my mom a quick, tight hug and squeezed my dad's shoulder. Then I turned and walked out of the hospital, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The 20-minute drive back to our town felt like an eternity. With every passing mile, the city lights faded, replaced by the deep, oppressive darkness of the countryside. The woods that lined the road seemed to press in, the trees like silent, ancient sentinels. I parked my car a quarter mile down the road from the cottage, just as my dad said he had. I killed the engine and the lights, plunging myself into an unnerving silence broken only by the chirping of crickets. The moon was a pale sliver, offering little light. I got out of the car, a heavy tire iron from my trunk clutched in my hand. It felt flimsy and useless against whatever I might find inside. The path to the cottage was overgrown, branches clawing at my clothes. My dad was right. The back of the cottage was cloaked in shadow, hidden from the road. The window he'd jimmied was still slightly ajar. My heart was in my throat as I slid it open and hoisted myself through, landing with a soft thud on the wooden floor of a small kitchen. The air inside was thick and smelled of dried herbs, beeswax, and something else. Something faintly metallic like old blood. Moonlight filtered weakly through the grimy windows, painting the room in shades of gray. It was surprisingly neat. Jars of herbs lined the shelves, strange symbols painted on their lids. Bunches of dried plants hung from the rafters. It wasn't the den of a monster, but it felt deeply, fundamentally wrong. I crept through the small living area and found the room my dad had described. It must have been a spare bedroom, but she had converted it into a studio. Canvases were stacked against the walls, most of them turned away. In the center of the room, just as he'd said, was an easel. A large canvas was on it, uncovered. I stepped closer, the tire iron held up like a pathetic shield. It was the painting of Leo. My dad hadn't exaggerated. It was my brother's face, but lifeless, a vessel being emptied. The eyes were black holes that seemed to pull the very light from the room. And the thorny vines that wrapped around him were darker, more prominent than my dad had described. I looked closer, my breath catching in my throat. The single drop of red on one of the thorns was still there, glistening under the faint moonlight as if it were wet. But it wasn't alone anymore. Beside it, another thorn was beginning to darken at its tip, a tiny pinprick of crimson starting to bloom. I felt a primal urge to smash the painting, to rip it from the easel and tear it to shreds. But a chilling thought stopped me. If this thing was truly linked to Leo, destroying it might destroy him. My phone buzzed in my pocket and I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was my mom. I answered, my voice a strangled whisper. "Mom, is he okay?" "No," she sobbed. "His heart just went into arrhythmia. The doctors are in there now. They're trying to stabilize him. Oh, honey, hurry." I looked from my phone back to the painting. A new drop of blood. A cardiac event. The connection was undeniable and immediate. Panic clawed at my throat. What was I supposed to do? I couldn't leave it, and I couldn't destroy it. I had to take it. I grabbed the edges of the canvas, my fingers recoiling slightly as if the paint were still wet and cold. As I lifted it from the easel, a strange sensation prickled across my skin, like a powerful static charge. The air in the room grew heavy, and the scent of ozone and decay intensified. Beneath the easel, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A small, dark circle of what looked like scorched earth or ash on the floorboards. This was where the trap had been. Hoisting the painting, I backed out of the room. It was surprisingly heavy, imbued with a weight that felt more than physical. As I turned to leave through the kitchen, a floorboard creaked behind me. I froze, my blood turning to ice. I wouldn't take that if I were you. The voice was soft, calm, and utterly terrifying. I spun around. Standing in the doorway of the studio was Alara. She wasn't a hag or a monster. She was just a woman, dressed in a simple dark dress, her stormy gray eyes fixed on the canvas in my hands. There was no anger in her face, only a profound, weary sadness. "What did you do to him?" I snarled, brandishing the tire iron. It felt ridiculous, but it was all I had. "I did nothing," she said, her voice even. "He did this to himself. He came here, drawn by the residual energy of this place. He was bright, so full of life. But he was also reckless. He saw my work, and he didn't understand. He thought it was a source of power, a shortcut." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my mind reeling. "This cottage was built on a place where the veil between worlds is thin," she explained, taking a slow step into the room. She gestured to the jars and herbs. "I'm a guardian of sorts. I keep the balance. The art is how I do it. I paint things to bind them, to keep them from crossing over. Leo saw my paintings of the dark things in the woods, the things that hunger, and he became obsessed. He wanted that power for his own art." It started to click into place. Leo's dark sketches, his mood swings, his fascination with her. "So you cursed him?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "He cursed himself. He came into my studio when I was away. He found one of my canvases, prepared with ash and river clay and other things he couldn't possibly comprehend. And on it, he painted a self-portrait. But he didn't use paint. He used his own life force as the pigment, pouring his vitality into the canvas, trying to bind a spirit of the woods to himself, to fuel his art. He thought he could control it." She looked at the painting with pity. "Instead, it tethered itself to him, and now it's feeding on him. The painting isn't draining him, it's a window to what is happening to him. The vines are the entity, and the portrait is the anchor." My head was spinning. This was insane, but it was the only explanation that fit the horrifying facts. So how do I stop it? How do I save him? Alara's gaze softened. "The bond must be broken. He forged it, so only he can break it. But he is too weak. Someone of his blood, however, might be able to sever the connection." She looked at me, a silent, heavy question in her eyes. "You would have to take his place in the portrait, even for a moment. You would have to feel what he is feeling, and willingly push the entity away from him and onto yourself. It will be drawn to a fresh source. Once it's focused on you, I can bind it." "Take his place?" I whispered, the horror of the idea sinking in. "Will it kill me?" "I don't know," she said with brutal honesty. "It will be the most painful thing you have ever experienced. Your life for his, a willing sacrifice. That is the only thing powerful enough to break a bond like this." My phone buzzed again. My dad. "They're losing him. The doctor said to prepare ourselves." There was no choice. There was never a choice. "Do it," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "Tell me what to do." She led me back to the studio and had me place the painting back on the easel. The second drop of blood was now a full, glistening crimson bead. "Give me your hand," she commanded. I held it out. She took a small silver knife from a pouch at her belt and, without ceremony, drew a thin, sharp line across my palm. I flinched as my own blood welled up. "Now," she said, her voice dropping into a low, rhythmic chant. "Place your hand on his heart in the painting. Don't think. Feel your brother. Pour all your love, all your memories, all your will to save him into this single point of contact. When you feel it latch onto you, push it away from him." I took a deep breath and pressed my bloody palm against the chest of the painted Leo. The moment my skin touched the canvas, the world dissolved. It wasn't a flash of light. It was a plunge into absolute cold. Agony ripped through me, 1,000 icy needles sinking into my soul. I could feel the entity, a cold, ravenous hunger, its thorny tendrils sinking deep into my spirit, draining my warmth, my memories, my life. I could feel Leo, a faint, flickering ember on the verge of being extinguished. I focused on that ember. I pictured him laughing, painting in the sun, annoying me as only a brother could. I poured every ounce of my being into that thought, screaming in the silent abyss of my mind. Get away from him! I felt a sickening lurch as the immense pressure shifted, the countless needles pulling out of that distant ember and sinking into me. The hunger turned its full attention to me, and the pain intensified tenfold. My vision blackened, and I felt myself falling. The last thing I heard was Alara's voice, chanting in a language I didn't recognize, and the last thing I saw was her hands, covered in glowing symbols, slamming down onto the painting. I woke up on the floor of the studio. Sunlight was streaming through the window, and birds were singing outside. For a moment, I was completely disoriented. Then it all came flooding back. I scrambled to my feet. The room was empty except for the easel. The painting of Leo was still there, but it was changed. The background was just the woods now, calm and peaceful. The gray, ashen tint to his skin was gone. The thorny vines had vanished. It was just a portrait of my brother, asleep. My hand throbbed, and I looked down to see the cut on my palm was gone, replaced by a faint white scar that looked like a tiny leafless branch. My phone was on the floor beside me. 20 missed calls from my parents. I dialed my dad's number, my heart hammering. He picked up on the first ring. He's back, my dad sobbed, his voice thick with relief and disbelief. Son, he's back. In the middle of the night, he just woke up. The doctors can't explain it. His vitals are normal. The marks on his skin are gone. He's weak, but he's here. He's asking for you. Where are you? Tears streamed down my face. I looked at the painting of my sleeping brother, at the peaceful woods behind him. Ilara was gone. The only sign she had been there was the now inert painting and the faint white scar on my hand. I had no idea how I would ever explain what happened, or if I even should. But none of that mattered. I'm on my way, Dad, I said, my voice cracking. I'm on my way home.